Hey everybody, and welcome to part 5 of how to build your own Ultimaker 3D printer. Tonight we're going to assemble the material feeder, which is the device on the back of the printer that pushes the filament through this Bowden tube so that it can be extruded onto the part. The first part of the process is to assemble the material feeder, which has a servo motor in it, 2 ball bearings, a little black gear that it drives with, coupler, 4 25mm screws, 4 20mm screws, and 2 lock nuts. Now the wooden parts are on 2 separate dies. The first one is this little piece here labeled 10B, and then we have all 3 of these pieces here, which are in a thicker wood. Every one of these goes into the material feeder, so I'm just going to pop them out right now. And notice they're the only parts on this thick plywood. Now this piece is not used, that is. And then we have these 2 other pieces here, hold the ball bearings, 10A, C, so now you can see we have 10A, B, C, and the centerpiece. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this gear onto the motor shaft. Now you'll notice the motor shaft is D-shaped. It has a flat side, and the hole in the gear also has a flat side, and so you got to rotate it exactly right to get it on there, so it doesn't slip when it's doing its thing. And the goal is not to push it all the way down, but just to push it till the end of the shaft is flush with the gear, so the gear is on the end of the shaft. Now I can only push it down so far with my fingers. This is a very tight fit, and so I'm an advocate of whacking it a little bit to knock it on, and I think this blue tape is a really gentle hammer, so I tend to use it when I need to whack stuff. So I'm going to take it and hit it a few times like this, and then rotate it, come at it from a different angle, it'll move a little bit. It's a slow process, and as you can see, I'm finally getting it where it's flush. Okay, so the gear is on, completing the first step of the process. Okay. The next step is to take these 2 bearings, the last 2 we haven't used, and press them into these wooden parts here. They go in the holes here. Just put your thumb on them, press down. Try not to whack these because you can split the wood real easy. It's thin there. It went right in, and now it's flush with both sides. So that one's finished. I'll do the same thing with this one. You'll just sort of snap in place. Work your finger around to different parts of the rim of the bearing, and it'll just tilt its way right in there until it's flush like that. And so again, we use our process of laying the parts out in the exact order they're going to be stacked so that we don't get confused. And this is, as you see, motor, 10C, 10B, 10A, but in this case 10A, the letters are down, not up, and then the top flange here. So you can see there's 4 holes in these parts that are going to line up with these 4 holes on the motor. And you can also see that I've oriented the cable to point towards the parts because that is exactly how we want it to be in the final configuration. So there's a little bit of trickiness here involving this couple. It's held by these 2 with this one sandwiched in between. So start out, you're not going to try and force it down in there with parallel sides like we've done in the past. Instead, you're going to put the flat part up, and it's going to nuzzle right down in there with the hole above the bottom part. You can see that. So that now when we bring 10B into the picture here, and line up its oval holes, you can see that it's sitting nicely against the coupling, and the channel through the coupling is still open. That's where our filament's going to go. Now we can bring the top part down, and we have effectively contained this coupling between the wooden parts. And let me pick this up to you and show it to you from the side so you understand. If you can see that, it's not going anywhere. The two flat sides are here, and it's caught between these two parts. So that's a correct assembly there. And so now we're going to lay the last piece on the top like this. So that completes our stack. Now it's loose up there, so what I recommend you do is go ahead and drop the 25mm bolts down through here. These only have to go through 3 pieces of wood, so they're shorter. These are the 20mm. So I've used so far 2 25s and 2 20s. And so now I'm going to take all of those guys and pick them up, and they're going to drop straight through. I'm going to use the handy tool provided by Ultimaker again, and just start loosely dropping them into the motor screws. Once you get the first one in place, the other guys will go a lot easier. There's the first one. Now I can line it up. There goes the second one that started. The third one started. And the fourth one started. So now we've started getting our assembly together here. And you can see there's places for 4 more bolts, and we have 4 more bolts left, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. What I'm going to do now is snug these down a little bit just to get a little more rigidity, but I'm not going to tighten them all the way. And you can see now that our gear is lined up with where the larger gear is going to go inside of this assembly here. This big gear is going to go here to be driven by this little gear here. Okay, so now we're going to put a 20mm through this hole, and it's going to drop through the center pieces of the wood. Might need to tap it a little to get it to go all the way through, or screw it. Works as well. So that one's through. And then we'll put a second 20mm through the other hole, and it just drops straight through. Of course it did, because it's all lined up. Now I'm going to use lock nuts, put them from the back here. And again, as you know, I like to hold them still and thread them with the nut, by turning the screw with the driver. Okay, so the other lock nut that goes here. Okay, and finally the last 25mm nut goes through this other hole, or screw goes through this other hole over here, and it's also going to be a little bit stubborn with me, but there, right through. And a third lock nut is required, and it goes here. Okay, so that completes the first part of the assembly. Looking good. We've got matching curves here on either side. Gear housing here, bearing for the shaft. So now I'm going to just tighten these guys on down. First the motor screws, and we'll need to hold off on finally tightening them because this thing slides like this, and we'll need to mate it with the gear properly. So for now I'm going to push it over to the side, and then we're going to tighten up these side screws here with the lock nuts. And you will need hold lock nut, which I'm doing here with a pair of needle nose pliers. You can use any kind of pliers. So snug it all up, and there you go. So now we're going to assemble the drive bolt, which will drive this gear. First, let's get him out of the wood. The laser cutting amazing. We also need the bolt cover, which is here. see it has the word extrude on it. And the way it came in the kit is the drive bolt axle and all the nuts and washers and everything we need are all assembled. And so I'll take you apart and show you what it is. This is a cap nut, 8mm, some washers, another 8mm nut, and this knurled drive bolt here, which is going to hold the whole thing together. We also need the Delrin clip, which is part of the black plastic injection molded stuff you got, and then 3 14mm screws and 3 lock nuts. Okay, so we start out in assembly of the drive bolt by taking this nut, this 8mm nut, and inserting it into this hole. And it's going to need a little persuading, but it will go. And again, we can use my tape trick. Alright, so it's in and lined up. I actually had to go into the kitchen and put it on the floor and tap it to get it through, but it's fixed. Now it's right. So you can see it's in there and the threads are on the inside. Now I want you to notice the extrude words are going to go on the outside part and be visible here like this. And they will only line up with the cap one, or with the gear one way. If I flip it this way, the holes don't match. So I know it goes this way. So our next step is to insert the 14mm screws, and I did that backwards. The screws go through the gear and then through the housing so that the nuts will be outside of the mechanism and not in there. So I'll just thread the first one on. Same thing here, number 2. Do a little movement of the gear to line it up. Go right through. Do my favorite thing, which is to hold the nut still and thread it with the driver. And then number 3, you know you're doing it right if the screw heads are on the gear side and the lock nuts are on the far side. Okay, so we want to tighten these on down and turn this thing into a solid assembly. So I'm going to grasp each one with the needle nose. Tighten the lock nuts down. You can feel them. The lock nuts keep it from coming undone when it's rotating. Okay. Now I've attached the gear. The next step is to take this knurled or hobbed bolt and thread it into the nut from the gear side, like that. On this side, we're going to put the cap nut, and then we're going to drop. They supplied 3 washers. I'm suggesting we start with 2, like this, because this is going to ride on top of the bearing. Okay, so here we have to make an adjustment. Like I showed you before, I put 2 washers to start with, and I found out that that's going to be plenty good for us. And this is where the cap nut comes in. It will force the hob nut to stop at a height that you set, so you can adjust it and close it, and it will lock the hob nut at any height that you'd like. And the trick of it is we need to put the hob nut through the bearings here so that the flange is sticking up enough so that when we install the Delrin clamp, it will actually fit. If it's too low, that won't work. So I've adjusted it a little bit already, and like I say, you can do this by, oops, I dropped the washer. You can do this by loosening the cap bolt, changing the height of the hob bolt here, and then snugging the cap bolt back. So I'm pretty happy with where I am right now. The lower flange is not sticking up above the wood, and there's plenty of room to put the Delrin clamp. So now that I've got the hob nut where I want it height-wise, I'm going to use the knurling with my fingers and tighten the cap nut down to lock it in place. See, I'm letting the gear rotate. That's changing the height. Don't do that. So I snugged it down, and now I have it at the right height. I have the cap nut snugged down so I can clamp the gear in place. Now you're going to also notice that as you turn it, it's rotating the black gear in the motor. Remember what I said earlier about adjusting these. You don't want it too tight, but you want it to work. And so now that I've got all that lined up, I'm going to come back here and cinch down the motor screws, and again use a star pattern so things move the minimum amount. Do them a little bit at a time. Just keep working it. Okay, so now let's check it again, make sure I didn't overdo it. Goes right in there, drives the motor just fine. My Hobbs bolt is the right height, the flange is not sticking up. And so now I'm ready for the final assembly. Okay, here's the back side, and now I'm going to take this Delrin clamp and lock the shaft in place with it by pushing it on like that. And again, we're going to check everything, make sure it rotates fine. Looks like we're good. Alright, the next step in the process here is to assemble the clamp, and it's made of these black plastic parts. This is called the clamp itself. Black lever, this round black part, the small bearing. Be careful not to lose that in your multiple bags that came with the kit. Easy to lose. We need one washer, 7 lock nuts, 4 16mm, 3 20mm, 1 25mm, and this spring here. The first step in assembling the clamp is to insert the bearing into the black piece. And so this will just be done. If you've done with every bearing so far, get it nice and flat and just push it down in there. You can see it's giving me a little bit of grief. Try it from the other side. It's again tight fit, like a lot of things in this kit. So I tried to push it in by hand, and it's giving me trouble. So recommended procedure is to take a piece of wood. This came out of the assembly for the feeder. I'll use it, and that allows you to hold the bearing flat because it pushes evenly against it. So just take the piece of wood and hold it in your hand, and it will snap right in like that. So as per usual, I have laid out the parts how they're going to go. Now you'll notice that these end plates have semicircular cutouts on them. These will be facing in towards this circular cutout here. So this other one also on this other far side here has that same cutout. The bearing is going to be sandwiched in between by the cutout like this. So it's going to be in there and with the piece on the other side. So the first step is line it up like this and then insert this nut crosswise in there so it's held in place. Now you can put the bearing in, and then you can come with the final piece and put it on top. We're going to use 16mm fasteners here to go through these holes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. All 16, get them lined up here. And once I have them all 4 in, I can just pick the assembly up, push them through like that, and now I can put the lock nuts on the other side. And so again, this time I'm going to use my fingers and just thread them a little bit. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now let's tighten them. Again, we use the factory supplied 2mm driver. Pliers to hold the lock nuts. Don't snug it down all the way, just get them a little snug first time through. You want to keep it up because the bearing will fall out otherwise. Again, using your fingers on the shaft of this driver keeps you from over tightening stuff. Okay, so now we have 1 25mm and three 20 millimeters left, and so the 20 millimeter goes through the bearing like this. Now it won't fall out. Right, now that I've got the 20 millimeter nut through, I'm going to put a lock nut on it, just enough to hold it so it doesn't fall out, and go back and tighten all of my corner bolts, lock the assembly down. So come at them from the side is more stable. Okay, that tightened that one. Number 2. And finally this bottom one here. Assembly is getting more rigid as we tighten. So now, bearings free to roll. It's not coming out. Alright, so you notice that I tightened this lock nut down so it's not slipping, but I've left a lot of play, and that's because this part of the clamp assembly, or what they call the U-bracket, is going to sit down over it like this. So now you can see I'm getting, it has seated itself on both sides, and now I can come with the 25 millimeter. It fits. So we're going to put this spring after this washer. So washer goes first on the head, then the spring like this, and then in it goes. Now I notice I pre-fit it because it's a little difficult with the spring, and you need to know that it's going to go in there before you start messing around. Say it's there. You have to compress it with the screwdriver. Alright, so we got the basics there. We have the spring, the washer, the 25 millimeter screw, which is bolted into that bolt, the nut that we put down inside of there, and we have this axle here, and the bearing still rotates. So now we're going to attach the clamp assembly to the drive body with this adjustable locking lever and these 20 millimeter screws and lock nuts. And so in order to do that, we have to start by removing the Del ring clamp we put in earlier. So it'll just pull right off the axis like this. And then we'll remove, oops, I dropped the washer, don't do that. Need both washers. So now, orientation is very important here. The goal is to have the screw sticking up, so that hole, so we're going to start out with it over here like this, and notice the head of the screw goes on the gear side, not the far side. We don't want the lock nut getting tangled up with the gear. So it's through. Now we're going to do what I always do, is put the lock nut on by driving it with the screw. I don't tighten it down yet. And then the next part is to put this black locking lever. Now notice this isn't a hole, it's a slot. It's highly adjustable. And that's going to be very important when we're dialing things in to get it running right. So it goes through. Same thing. I'm going to put the lock nut on from the back and use the screwdriver, the hex screwdriver they provided, to get it going. Okay, so now here comes the fun part. The clamp flips over and this plate drops into that slot like that. And then as you continue to push down, it snaps into place. Beautiful, isn't it? Fits like a champ. And then this guy comes between those two like that. That's the key. So he's in there, the nut's in there. Now let me tighten these down a little bit. Can't put the gear back until we do. Again, don't use the pliers because they can overdo it, damage things. Use your fingers on the screwdriver they provided. And that way you know you won't ever do anything too tight. So I'm just going a little snug right now. This piece will have to be positioned later, tuning it up, so I'm just gonna not even really put him snug, just sort of get him so he doesn't flop around so much. Okay, so there, he's free to slide and he's free to rotate in and out. So there we have it. We've completed the installation of the clamp into the body of the material feeder. Now we're going to attach the material feeder to the frame and the Bowden tube. So the procedure for doing it is, first we're going to put the wooden gear and the cover assembly back with our hob tool. We're going to come from the side now, we have some nuts in the way, with the Del ring clamp and push it in like that. You can see now it's not going to rotate, it's up against these nuts, and so it's secured. The gear's in, test it for rotation, it's just fine. So now we're going to take the Bowden tube. I'm going to come around here, this little blue horseshoe clamp, just like on the blue horseshoe clamp here. Of course, there's going to be one on the other end. So the Bowden tube is now inserted into this coupling mechanism like this, and locked into place with the blue horseshoe, which goes thumb ridge up. And there we have it. Feed it in on the short side so that it's flat up against it like that from the back. Now we simply hang the material feeder from the back and we finished assembling it. Okay, the last part of installing the material feeder is to put the spool holder. Again, let me show you this spool. Here it is. It's got the plastic filament on it that's used by the 3D printer to make the parts. It's going to sit back here crosswise like this. And these two sets of holes here are going to hold the little rack that holds the spool feeder. So in order to assemble it, we need all 6 of these parts marked 11C here. And then 4 more parts. 2 of them are shorter. They're marked 11B. And then 2 more of them are longer. They're also marked 11B. You see, these have 4 notches. These have 2. You get a little argument here. And you can see the laser did not quite burn through there. So we're not going to force it. It's a delicate part. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a razor. I recommend a straight razor like this because it's safer. But you can use an X-Acto or anything you like. And we're going to just nip away at those little wooden things there until the razor can push through. Not very often I run into these kind of problems, but it's just, sometimes it happens. Again, the key is not to force it. So I went ahead and pulled it off. That'll allow me a little bit better access. So cutting here, it always works best if you go into the correct existing slot and kind of rock it around. Oops. And you can see there that I did. Getting close to it coming off. There you go. Success. Clear that little wood filament out there, and we got it. Okay, so now I have all 10 parts. 6 of those, 4 of those, and we'll assemble our spool holder. Pretty simple. We take them engraved side out like this. We take a semicircular part like this, insert it down, and you can see how the laser cutter has made these little tongues that are going to catch and snap them into place, and they will go into those little grooves right there. So it's pretty amazing what you can do with a laser cutter. I'm working it down here. Okay, that's one. Same thing here. Do the back one too. Alright, so after you get them into the initial position, you can see this one's already down and this one's not. They will snap into place, and so you just have to hold them with your fingers like this and push. Snap down. Let's see if this does it. There. So now that's in place. You can see the curved part is smooth with the edge there. That's the small one. Now the big one. 1, 2, 3, 4. All in. Now we're going to come do the other side. Get them all lined up and in position. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So now both of them are flush and assembled. Now why we have two of them? The answer is because the spools come in different widths. Well, this one, take it out of the bag now. Fits on this. But if we ever extend our 3D printer and want to use two colors, which it's all set up for, then you can see that because we have the place for the other Bowden tube to go here. In order to do that, we'll have to buy an extension kit and put the other material feeder on this side, and you'll have two Bowden tubes going, but we're only using one. So we're going to install the regular 2 rib single holders for the spool, and then I'm just going to show you that we can put the spool right there. And there it is. So that completes the assembly of the material feeder for the Ultimaker Original Plus.